Return of the welcome call. 25 years ago, telemarketing was heralded as a pioneer of one-to-one relationships. But recently, this unique and intimate medium has been abused and the industry is in crisis. The DMA has been at the forefront of the debate regarding the future of the telemarketing industry. It has taken the lead, working closely with the government, the regulators and the industry to increase awareness of the rules and risks for those who ignore them. The story begins over 10 years ago, when some consumers were unhappy receiving sales and marketing calls. After industry-wide consultation, the DMA introduced the Telephone Preference Scheme, a voluntary self-regulatory initiative that was created and paid for by the DMA with support from BT. 2 years later, the issue was picked up in Brussels, where a Europe-wide opt-in regime was proposed. Colin Fricker and Colin Lloyd from the DMA, with the help of FEDMA, the Federation of European Direct Marketing Associations, successfully argued that opt-in was not necessary in the UK, as the TPS gave customers sufficient choice. This was a major success for the DMA, protecting many thousands of jobs and generating countless millions of pounds of revenue. In 1999, the voluntary telephone preference scheme was stopped when the regulations were adopted by the government and replaced by the statutory telephone preference service, and the accumulated registrations were transferred to the new service. In 2000, it became clear the widespread use of predictive dialers was causing further public disquiet. The DMA Telemarketing Council introduced the first guidelines on the use of dialers anywhere in the world into the DMA code, which was welcomed by the industry, dialer manufacturers and the regulators. In the 2003 Communications Act, Ofcom were given powers to enforce a new offence of persistent misuse of network and to levy fines of up to £5,000. They investigated a number of call centres and used the provisions of the DMA code as their reference point. In 2004, following a number of high-profile media stories, the DMA and TPS commissioned the Brookmead Report, the first ever research into the impact of nuisance calls on the public. It allowed the DMA to identify the key issues and decide on a strategy. After a period of consultation, Ofcom updated their statement on persistent misuse in March 2006. And the Department of Trade and Industry increased the maximum fine that could be imposed from £5,000 to £50,000. The Brookmead Report discovered what the public really felt. Information was provided by the Telecom Operators Nuisance Call Bureau. On the front line, they take calls from people who are worried about the calls they receive. A sample of 1,000 people, representative of the UK population, gave feedback on how they felt, and recent TPS registrants were surveyed. Two issues jumped out. Firstly, each householder receives many times more uninvited calls at home than they did 10 years ago, and the numbers continue to rise. Secondly, silent calls can cause not just nuisance but real anxiety for around 20% of the population. This anxiety is far greater for women than for men, particularly the under-25s and those who live alone. Worryingly, 41% of women under 24 feel anxious whenever they receive a silent call. These concerns led to a rise in complaints about nuisance calls. BT estimates that it receives over 100,000 complaints per month, and the TPS file is growing at many hundreds of thousands of numbers per month. It was clear the anonymity the telephone system gave the call centre was a key issue in causing anxiety. The DMA therefore amended its code to make it compulsory for all direct marketing calls, whether they originated on a dialer or not, to carry CLI. Additionally, a register of the CLIs the DMA members use was created and made available to the public so they can see whether a DMA member has made the call. Unfortunately, not everyone is compliant with the DMA code or Ofcom's rules. There is evidence of significant abuse. The report calculated that if all known dialers in the UK were running at 5% abandonment rate, then each adult in the UK would receive on average 3 or 4 silent calls a year. The consumer research found that each adult was receiving around 80 silent calls a year, 20 times as many. This gap is called the silent call chasm, and is believed to be caused by a number of factors. Some rogue operators in the UK are running their dialers at levels much higher than 5%. Ofcom have identified some running at 50%. Around a third of marketing calls received by UK consumers originate from overseas, and some claim that these do not comply with the 5% guidelines. Activities such as number scanning or pinging could also generate a significant number of silent calls. And there may have been some over-reporting by consumers when they estimated the number of silent calls they received. The growth in the TPS file has been dramatic, and we are now at the stage where half the households in the UK are on the list. Projections into the future suggest that there will not be anybody left to call within a few years. And the demographic groups that are of most interest to the marketers have been most eager to register. So, maintaining the TPS list is worthwhile for all of us. Certainly, Ofcom has demonstrated its desire to work with our industry in condoning well-managed dialers in the face of many voices calling for an outright ban. Ofcom would prefer to see the continuation of the classic self-policing environment. Research amongst TPS licensees in March 2006 has shown various opinions as to the future. One view is that TPS will become unworkable due to cost and viability. Others think things will carry on for the foreseeable future. Another view, and perhaps the most interesting option, is a rather philosophical one, and one that reaches the kernel of the issue, of how to sustain customer satisfaction. TPS cleaning is just good practice. TPS gives us a valuable insight into a customer's predisposition for receiving calls, whatever our reason for calling them. For example, market research companies can call a TPS registrant, whilst most people consider TPS covers all calls. Other developments may include looking at various routes to opt in, such as the US model for cross-media permission and time-lapse re-registration. We look forward to presenting a balanced case for each of these issues. So what of the future? The DMA is committed to continuing support of the call centre industry, but recognises that it only has a long-term future if it respects the consumer. Specifically, the DMA believes that all outbound calls, not just dialer calls, should carry a caller CLI unless a specific exemption is given. Consumers should be able to know in advance who is calling them, be they from commerce or public sector, dialer or manual call. The DMA also believes that the regulators and network operators should work together to find ways of preventing calls entering the UK from call centres that are not compliant with UK regulations. The DMA believes that the TPS has an essential role now and in the future. And finally, the DMA will encourage Ofcom to use its powers to hit the rogue operators with large fines. The DMA will continue to lobby on these issues. Government and regulators are looking to the DMA to continue to take the lead, knowing that our interest is sustaining the long-term future of organised telephone communication. As a member of the DMA, you have a voice and an opportunity to influence the future of the industry. You will also be the first to find out about changes in this fast-moving environment, which will help you plan for your own company's future. We have an opportunity to shape the future. Join us and join in the debate.